Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
There is increasing evidence that the universe, including our reality, is multidimensional in nature. I have questions. Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. Barbara Hand Clow is joining us this hour to investigate the 9 dimensions and their evolutionary influence. Barbara is an internationally acclaimed astrologer, ceremonial teacher, Mayan Calendar researcher, and author of numerous books, including The Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, Activating the Full Spectrum of Consciousness. Barbara's partner and co-author, Gerry Clow, is a registered craniosacral therapist and board-certified polarity practitioner. For more than 3 decades, the couple have taught thousands of students worldwide how to navigate the 9 dimensions to lead fuller, more conscious lives. Barbara, thanks for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thank you, Gwilda. It's great to be here again.
Yes, it's always so fun to have you on. We never have enough time to cover everything.
No, you're a lot of fun.
It's so rich. Barbara, what brought you to studying dimensions, and how did you become aware of them?
How did I become aware of the dimensions? Well, back in 1994, actually, I started realizing that I was like having tinnitus and all kinds of head problems and all that. And I started realizing that something was trying to reach me. So I surrendered, and I sat for about 3 or 4 hours in just a state of bliss with a beautiful icosahedral form kind of in front of my forehead that was radiating light. And I received a download. And then the problem was, it was scientific. It involved quantum mechanics. It involved string theory. It involved all kinds of complicated science, which I did not understand at the time. So I decided the only thing I could do was just channel the material, because I know that when one is in a channel state, your left brain, I don't understand this, and I get out of the way, and it just comes through. So I did 18 channeled sessions in the fall of 94 and into spring of 95. And I had them tape recorded. And then once it was done, and the interesting thing about it being done, it really was a download. This 18th session came, we were done. And this was with a group of people that I selected because they understood science and stuff like that and could ask the right questions, even though I didn't. It was interesting. And so then I turned it into a person who could transcribe it for me on a computer. And then once I got all of the 18 sessions transcribed, and then I was like ready to make it into a book, because that's what I was doing professionally for Bear & Company. And so I worked on it all summer and made it into a book, and it came out in the fall, and it was called The Pleiadian Agenda, A New Cosmology for the Age of Light. And it was a huge bestseller. It was just like Gerry and I were just overwhelmed. We were running Bear & Company, trying to raise our kids, 4 kids. And then we hit the bestseller. And so what I did was I just, the only way I could like understand what I had just brought in was to teach it. So I started teaching it. And Gerry,
where was the information coming from?
Oh, it was clearly coming from the Pleiadians, and the being who brought the information through called herself Sacha.
Okay.
And she's quite a bit different than I am, which gives legitimacy to this, because she's just very saucy and kind of a difficult personality, actually. But she was just determined to get this information through. And then something really fascinating happened. I was the acquisitions editor at Bear, and I was getting about 10,000 queries a year or something like that I had to deal with. And I got 4 queries for the same information. Now, this is not New Age love and light. This is complicated material. And so I started to realize that at least 4 other people had received the same data. And so somehow there really was a download. And another interesting thing about it is when I did the channel sessions and brought the data in, it was exactly the same time when Edward Witten wrote his calculations for superstring theory. So the one thing, yeah, I know it is, because from the very beginning, I knew that superstring theory was behind this, and it was important. And we can talk about that because it's very interesting, actually.
So, would you please define the dimensions as we'll be working with them today?
Okay, the first dimension is the center of the Earth, which is an iron core crystal. The second dimension is the space between the iron core crystal and the core and the surface of the planet, and that's the realm of it's called the telluric realm, with all the magma and all the volcanic stuff and all that wonderful hot energy below the surface. And then we're on the surface in the third dimension, and the third dimension is linear space and time. It's just that simple. Then the fourth dimension is a collection of all of the thoughts of the humans living on planet Earth.
So, is
And
that like the Akashic records?
well, actually, the Akashic records seem to be in that iron core crystal.
Oh,
And this
interesting.
fourth dimensional realm is the collective mind. And and fourth dimensions and the second dimensions are actually pretty close to some of Jung's writings about the subconscious and unconscious mind. It's psychological. But the important thing about the fourth dimension is that it's all of our thoughts that are all connected, and it's what connects us. And so it's the part of our reality that's the most difficult for us, because it dualizes and splits into dark and light and positive and negative just by the very nature of the collective mind. And then once we get through the fourth dimension, we move into the fifth dimension, which is the realm of the heart, and it's the realm of unconditional love. And then when we move out of unconditional love, then we move into sacred geometry, which is the sixth dimension. And then the sixth dimension is created by sound coming from the universe. And I've always thought that was really interesting, because all of our sacred scriptures, like the Bible, they always say that the word created the world, the geometry. And so then beyond the seventh dimension, which is the realm of sound, we go into the eighth dimension, which is the realm of the divine mind, the light, and you could certainly refer to that as God. A lot of people do, and I'm comfortable with that. And then the ninth dimension is really interesting, because according to the Pleiadians, the ninth dimension is where time exists. And this is totally contrary to quantum mechanics and a lot of scientific theory. But the best way to understand it is to realize that the divine mind, just like any great creative thinker in the eighth dimension, is working with time in order to unfold evolution. And so the ninth dimension, actually, it took me years and years to figure out how the ninth dimension could be time. But now, after working with Carl Johann Kalaman, the author of a lot of books on the Mayan calendar, now I understand how time unfolds. So that's the 9 dimensions. And there still are higher dimensions beyond that. But the Pleiadians said at the time, when I channeled this material, that humans only had the ability to understand these 9 dimensions. So
I can see that, because it's like the human mind, it can only conceive of so much, and what all that is a lot larger than that.
yeah, that's true. And then what's interesting is people are breaking into higher dimensions beyond these, which tells me that more dimensions are opening up. For example, a Canadian author wrote a book called The Realized Light of 12 Dimensions. His name is Joshua Reichman. And so we are breaking into these higher dimensions, but my part of the job seems to be to work with the 9. And thank you, that's enough.
I can imagine. So, are there an infinite number ultimately of dimensions?
Well, some people, scientists say there's at least 26, but I think I do better on the first 9 than they do on any. I mean, I think the issue is, what do these mean to us? How do they affect us? How do we work with them? How can we use them? And that's really what I'm a real practical kind of person.
That makes perfect sense as well, because it's lovely to have the theory of them, but if we can't bring the rubber to the pavement,
Yeah.
it's just an exercise in doing nothing, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. And so when I went out and started teaching it, because the Pleiadian agenda came out, and I then had to teach that because that was the first part of this whole thing. So we're back to 1995. I'm teaching it. And the interesting thing about that was I didn't understand the higher dimensions, but I understood the lower dimensions really well. And so I was drawing in people who wanted to learn about the lower dimensions. Then they were teaching me about the higher dimensions. So by the time I got up to 2003, 2004, I realized that I had gathered enough information about all of these 9 dimensions in order to write Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, because Alchemy of 9 Dimensions is a scientific analysis of this data bank that got unloaded from the Pleiades back in 95. So that's where it comes from.
That's that's mind-bending, quite frankly. So it is time for us to take a commercial break.
Mhm.
Barbara and I will return very shortly. So don't you go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. How many dimensions are there anyway? With us this hour discussing multidimensionality is the author of Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, Activating the Full Spectrum of Consciousness, Barbara Hand Clow. Her website, handclow2012.com. Barbara, we were talking about how many dimensions there are, and you've been working with the 9 pretty exclusively, but there's evidence that there's ones beyond that. But we were talking about, is it an infinite number of dimensions? Do you have any clue there?
Well, as I said, now we've got another author who's going. And the issue about this is, this isn't about mathematics. This isn't about theory. This is about how we experience things. Now,
Okay.
understanding like how those dimensions function and how you go, like in terms of science and physics and all that. Of course, I took a very good stab at how the whole thing works. But we don't actually really need that. We just need our own experiences. And so, for example, the 5th dimension, where we where we move beyond duality and polarization and dark and light, and we start to move into unity consciousness, which is the open heart. And the funny thing about this material and writing this book was I was tempted to not bother at all, because all you really need to do is get into the heart. But the Western mind, including my own, it tends to be complex and tends to be very intellectual, and it wants to understand like how do galaxies relate to us, and how does astrology we want to understand those things. And so the way we understand those things is through experience, like, for example, doing things like exploring our past lives, or exploring astrology. Or if you get into the 9th dimension, which is the dimension of time, when I finally fully understood it and started to re-experience it myself, I experienced some states of cosmic bliss that are just indescribable. There's something about that place in our reality where evolution is bringing us forward that's very mystical and very, very intense. And I actually think that that's the crisis that we're up against right now. We're opening up to that. And I can tell you, from having opened up to it myself and experienced it so much, it's cosmic, it's light, it's bliss, it's heavenly. And it's very hard for people's physiology and their emotions and their bodies and everything to catch up with those kinds of accelerated frequencies.
So it sounds like you're saying that we need to do processing on all levels to clear the facility in order to connect.
Yeah.
Is that how long does that take? It's an inside job, obviously, but how long
It's
does that?
really different for everybody, but I can put one parameter in it that I think is very important. We have been stuck in the 4th dimension for a long time because of the way global politics works and the way finance works. We've been stuck in a lot of control through the collective mind. And as we start to open up, what's actually happening is we're actually starting to remember the past. It's really an interesting situation, because one of the things we're in the middle of right now is a mass awakening of a new understanding of archaeology and ancient history. And so in order to, now what we're talking about at this moment in time is I did an edition of Alchemy of Nine Dimensions in 2004. That came out, and then I taught it and all that. Then I did a revision of it in 2010, because the fourth dimension wasn't exactly right and I wanted to correct it. And then we come up to 2024, 20 years later. And the question is, for a 20th anniversary edition, what was I going to be able to get into that was really new? And so one of the things I did in the book was I added material about the information that's flooding our reality right now, which is helping us to understand the past. And one of the things I found when I dug way into the deep past is that we seem to have been conscious on 9 levels of consciousness until about 12,000 years ago. And then 12,000 years ago, we went through a series of cataclysms that most people know of, like as the fall of Atlantis. And so we went through a series of cataclysms where we went through a tremendous amount of death on the planet and pain on the planet. And as a result of that period of time, we became a multi-traumatized species about 12,000 years ago. And this research actually comes from another book I wrote called Catastrophobia.
So Barbara, if we're working with these dimensions, are there more available now for some reason or another? I know that you've studied the Mayan calendar, and there's a lot to be said there. Is there something cyclic going on that's actually making this available to the average person?
Yeah, see, what's happening is, as this knowledge of the past, it has finally come forth again. We had a huge block on the truth about ancient history until about 1980, when things started to open up. This has been a long, slow opening, and I think people I really love, like Graham Hancock, who have given us such incredible information. And so as we've awakened, we have already discovered that we were once much more advanced than we are right now. And so as people start processing that idea that they actually contain, all of us contain cellular records and psychological memory records of being a much more developed and advanced species. And so the reason I've been teaching the material as much as I can is to help people have a way to understand how this awakening is working.
So it's bombarding all of us on the planet, but is everybody awakening, or are there some people that are going the other direction as fast as they can?
Well, there's a lot of people who are in resistance and in trauma. So when people, it's just like if somebody goes and recovers records of early childhood abuse or something. When you first go through the recovery of the memory of who you really are, there always is a lot of processing and a lot of psychological work. And that's why Gerry and I love working together, because he loves working with people one-on-one on the table. And then I love teaching in general.
It's lovely to see a partnership work so beautifully.
Yeah.
I want to commend you on that in this day and age.
Thank you.
But you guys have worked together for how long? You've been doing this sort of
Well,
thing and teaching.
we celebrated our 50th anniversary last year.
Oh, congratulations.
So, and we've raised a family and everything, but we went right. I'm just trying to remember. We really started working together professionally when our youngest child went off to preschool, which was about 45 years ago, 40 years ago, say.
So let's talk a little bit more about the cyclic happenings that are creating this opportunity for evolution.
Mhm.
What exactly is going on?
What exactly is going on with evolution? Okay. Well, I don't know, and I don't really think anybody does know, but I am an astrologer and I know a lot about timing. And we can tell by the planets in our solar system that our planet is going through a massive awakening. The most intense part of it is 2023 through 2027. And so we're in the middle of this now, and it's going to be very, very intense this spring because Saturn and Neptune are going to go into Aries. They're going to leave the sign Pisces, and this is going to be a very intense awakening. And so I do a lot of peace meditation because as we go through this, there's such a tendency for wars to be created and violence to rise to the surface. And all I think any of us can do is, first of all, help anybody if we can, but to be in the heart and to meditate with the people who are in such pain on this planet.
And there's a lot of them,
Yeah.
a lot of them. So, do you, is astrologically, this is time when it's fairly auspicious, if you will,
Mhm.
and each of us has a different horoscope. Is it affecting each of us in a different way?
Yes, of course it does, because each of us has a different horoscope. But the other part I'd like to add to this is I started out by saying we don't really know exactly what's going on. Well, some of the best information that has come to us has been coming to us from our position in the galaxy. And apparently our solar system is in the middle of a zone within the galaxy itself, the Milky Way galaxy, which makes it possible for us to go through a mass awakening of consciousness. And so, so it's interesting to me as an Earth astrologer to see how these energies seem to be dovetailing. And for example, another really important book that came out this last year is called The Yuga Shift by a guy named, let's see, Bibhu Dev Misra. He's an Indian philosopher. It's a wonderful book. And he's dealing with the issue of the end of the Kali Yuga, which he claims is March 2025. Now, the Kali Yuga is part of a 26,000 year cycle. So again, astrology is starting to dovetail with these more galactic levels where we're focusing more and more on this particular period of time. And that's why everybody's struggling so much. It's just too much. It's way too much for me. And then imagine, people who just don't have any idea what's going on.
It's intense. We're
Mhm.
just about time to take a station break, but let's begin. We'll probably end up finishing on the other side. What what are the symptoms that somebody, everybody's undergoing this somehow, but
Mhm.
what are the symptoms that a lot of people are having that they may not recognize?
Boy, they're really bad. There's a lot of people are having a lot of gastrointestinal issues, stomach issues, and colon issues and stuff like that. And then the other, let's throw in solar flares because solar
Oh, yeah.
flares are very activated, and solar flares are part of human activation on the Earth. It's part of our change cycle on the planet itself. So we're being affected by intense electromagnetic energy, which is making us nervous. A lot of people are having a lot of trouble sleeping. And the only thing that I can do is just continue to try to keep my head straight and maintain a sense of what might be happening. And then, most importantly, getting out into nature. Nature is soothing on this planet, regardless of all
Well,
this stuff.
it is that magical moment. We're going to take us another station break. Barbara and I will be right back to continue this discussion. So you stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Do we need a map to navigate all these dimensions? I want one.
Well, yeah,
This
I
is
take
Mission
the illustrations just because of that, because yeah, there actually are illustrations of that. Yeah.
This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing dimensionality is Barbara Hand Clow. Her website, handclow2012.com. Um, yeah, so we're all confronted with this. But is everybody responding in a similar way, or are some people just disengaging altogether?
I don't think it's possible to disengage in it because what this is all about is conscious awakening. And everybody's got to do it in their own way. And by the way, Gwilda, I do think when people start to recognize that there actually is a process going on here and that they're not just completely nuts, that's kind of the first step that actually helps a lot.
That is a cue, isn't it? Because a lot of the things that I've been experiencing, if I didn't have the knowledge base I do, I'm going,
Yeah.
Take me away and lock me up." You know,
Yes. Yeah, right.
it's time seems to be
Immediately.
right now. Yesterday, time seems to be um, compressing. Is this part of the phenomenon as well?
Yeah, boy, that I'm finding the time distortions really peculiar. Like one day you feel okay and you're kind of there and you're kind of up. Then the next day you're a complete basket case. Are you experiencing the same thing? You know,
Oh yes,
not every day, and all
yeah.
that, everything
A
like that.
lot of a lot of my clients are too. That's why I brought
Yes,
it
the
up.
clients.
Yeah.
Certainly, therapists are very busy right now. And fortunately, this is a collective awakening. And most therapists are very aware of what's going on. They know what the symptoms are. They know how to help people with it. And that's exactly what they're doing. And speaking of therapy and all that, another thing that really can help is acupuncture, because acupuncture keeps all of this, the electrical nervous systems of your body balanced. And so if people are having too much of a hard time with the energy, I do recommend acupuncture. And then I also wrote a whole book about this called Astrology and the Awakening of
Does does does
Kundalini.
this increased frequency, is it starting to shake loose our patterns as well? Like things that we've lived with and not really known all of a sudden coming to the fore?
I didn't understand. Okay.
So as we're being bombarded, if you will, by
Mhm.
increased frequency from the solar flares, from where we are in the galaxy, um, is this putting pressure on all our unprocessed places? And is that part of the crazy we're experiencing?
Yeah, definitely. I don't know exactly what to say about that. But I just think now I'm very mental, I'll admit it. And I do find that if I have some kind of at least a skeletal structure for how this is working through time, I mean, for example, now I'm really lucky to be a teacher. And so during this particular promotion phase of the 20th anniversary phase, I've been being interviewed by a lot of people in their 20s. And
That's
Gwilda, they are so up to speed. I mean, they have already, I know that we're getting someplace by judging how people are as we go down through age. And so I'm very, very encouraged by seeing so many people so totally aware beyond when I go back 40 years ago compared to that time. You know, I'm sure you're noticing the same thing. Yeah.
you know, the young ones are amazing. The younger, the more amazing, you know. And you
Yeah.
look at your grandkids and you're going, "Oh my goodness, you can do that," and I can't even figure it out. So yeah, it's. Do you think that they came in the young ones that are really on top of this information? Do you think
Mhm.
they were born in a different? Obviously, they were born in a different time than we are, but do you think that had something to do with it, the frequency that was available at the time of their birth?
That's right. What happens is when they were born, the frequencies were already more advanced than they were when we were born. So generally speaking, what I'm noticing is like I've been a teacher and I'm 81 years old, and I've been a teacher and I know a lot of other teachers, and we could only go just so fast because we had come from a certain point and we had so many things to work through. But now that we've worked through a lot of those blocks and locks on reality, the people who are a lot younger than us just don't have that, you know, and so that's certainly a sign that something really positive is going on.
It sounds like it, nature knows what it's doing. It gave them the elders
Mhm.
from the lower frequency time, kind of like to stabilize this transition. Is that what we have the opportunity of doing as elders?
Well, what we've got on our side is a lot of experience. And so some of the younger people that I talk to, that I do interviews with, also really value my experience because they know that they would not be where they are at this point if they hadn't had some of us breaking through a very hard reality 40 or 50 years ago.
So you brought up the chakras and acupuncture and all this stuff. Does the electromagnetic system that is our body, is that having to upgrade to clear to be able to bring this frequency through our bodies into the world?
This is a great question, and you're the first person who's actually asking it exactly that way. I think the upgrades that we're experiencing electromagnetically right now, which are very difficult, they're also related to solar flares. We had a solar flare in May where I had to go to bed. I just had to go back to bed at 9 in the morning. I stayed in bed till 2. I couldn't even move.
Hmm.
So I think what's going on, Gwilda, because I'm really an optimist, we are dealing with a tremendous amount of electromagnetic pollution because of cell towers and cell phones and all those things in our reality. Everybody knows it, but people feel like they don't have any choice but to use that type of technology. And I think these energy upgrades are happening to us so that the technology will not take us down, because there's a certain point, like how much can a body take? And so I think we should also be grateful for these upgrades, because they're taking us into a place where we're going to probably be beyond those problems.
That would be lovely.
Yeah.
Um, the pressure that's being put on our physical bodies, um, is that pressure coming from within? In other words, the places that we aren't in alignment with ourselves?
I would say yes. Yeah. In other words, there you are, and how are you doing deep within? And so when anything like this happens, like a tension period or whatever, I view it as an opportunity. Just, it's got to be an opportunity. And if you view it that way, you could get a lot further with it.
Yes, the mind has ways of doing things that we don't really recognize even.
Yeah.
Um, so are the dimensions and our relationship to them also evolving?
Yes, definitely evolving through time. But the other thing I was going to say is that in the 20th anniversary edition, I just decided to cover some things that have been discovered since the earlier editions came out that are proof for the material that I downloaded. And so I described the Blue Brain Project, which is a project that's going on in artificial intelligence and stuff like that. And what scientists are discovering right now, and some of this material is now available through the Blue Brain Project, they've discovered that our minds function according to 9 to 11 dimensions. And they've been able to actually create topographical maps of what the geometry of each one of these dimensions looks like. In the human brain, these images are showing that there's a separate geometry for each one of the dimensional ranges. And so as we're waking up individually, what's also happening is science is also waking up. But that's an interesting situation, because science is so heavily structured on secrecy, profit, and money and control, that the public doesn't always get some of this information. So I went ahead and presented some of that information because I think it's terribly important.
So how do we know what dimension we're in? What's it
Oh,
like?
that's a good one. Yeah, that's where just hearing the descriptions of the dimensions and studying them a little bit with a book like mine, and we're not unfortunately teaching workshops anymore. It just can't handle it. But we got all the information out there, and each one of the dimensions has a particular science, a particular quality. It feels a certain way. And then the other thing that I decided to do once I got this body of work done, I decided to write some fiction that describes people discovering dimensions. And this is called the Revelations Trilogy. And I think you and I talked about one of the books.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. And
when
so
you
what I
first started.
decided, yeah, I decided to answer the question you just asked. The best thing I could do is do some storytelling, show some people who are going through these experiences themselves,
So if a person sitting next to me is in a different dimension than I am, do they disappear, or how does that work?
Well, first of all, no matter what you do, you're in 3D, because this is linear space and time. And this is it's not the most solid dimension, because certainly the second dimension below the surface and down toward the core is even denser than the surface of the planet. But we're in 3D. And one of the things that's very important to realize is we're here for a reason. We chose to come here to live a life and do what we're doing right now here at this time. So somebody could be sitting next to you and you're both in 3D together, but that person could be, yeah, you've experienced it. You could be with a yogi who is totally into the open heart and unconditional love, and that person is really open in the fifth dimension. And once you start understanding these dimensions, you start spotting different dimensions working through people while they're in this dimension, just like they are for you.
So it's like we're the receivers in a way.
Yeah.
Once we're able to surf
Well,
the
yeah, and then back to the Blue Brain Project, we now know scientifically that our brains are receivers of dimensional knowledge.
oh,
And
are we misusing them then, right?
yeah, yeah. Isn't that
Well,
amazing?
it's time to take another station break. Barbara and I will delve deeper into mastering dimensions on the other side of this commercial break. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. So, how do we work this? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Barbara Hand Clow. Her website, handclow2012.com. I loved your description, Barbara, in the last segment of how we're all in 3D, ergo, we can see each other, but at the same time, simultaneously, some of us can be in other dimensions. Is a lot of this spontaneous? And if it is, how can we make it more conscious so we can work this?
Well, a good example is what the fourth dimension does to us. Now, this is this emotional realm. It's not physical, where we're polarized between dark and light or good and evil, you name it. And what happens with that realm is it creates a lot of psychological issues. It creates a lot of stress. And the ideal thing to do with that dimension is to learn how to develop the full spectrum of an issue. So let's say the person is struggling with the pain over what's going on in Gaza, and they're trying to figure out, like, are they against the Israelis? Are they against the Hamas? And and you're going back and forth, and who did this, and what happened, and what are they doing, and all that. And if you can open up yourself to the full spectrum of an issue, where you can see the dark and light of it, then you start to understand that whenever something happens in the light, there's a corresponding balance with the dark side. And that is one of the most difficult parts of being a human. The fourth dimension is by far the most difficult dimension for us. But when you're able to open yourself up to the full spectrum of an issue and see it from many points of view, a lot of the blockage and a lot of the stress does dissipate. So that's what therapy is about, actually. What happens in a therapeutic session, and the illustrations in this book use a lot of like illustrations of therapeutic sessions, because when we go to a session with somebody, what's happening is they're helping us to broaden that spectrum of the dark and the light so that we can find our way into the open heart.
It sounds like each dimension kind of has its own reality, its own set of rules. Are they anything
That's true.
like third dimension, or how can we tell?
No, it's true. And so therefore I described in detail those kinds of characteristics. And so the interesting thing about the third dimension, which is where we live, is that the access to the higher dimensions has a lot to do with opening the heart and with getting in touch with geometry and with some fairly complex levels of consciousness. And so one of the ways we do that in the third dimension, and of course I'm part Cherokee, so I'm indigenous, we need to keep track of the directions, because the directions, while we're living on the planet, each one of the directions has a certain quality. And if we're sensitive to that, we locate ourselves much more solidly in 3D. Because see, the idea is to really be grounded in your body in the third dimension. And then you field the fourth dimension with your mind and emotions.
So when we're clearing up and making ourselves more available to receive this information, what about interpretation? Does a lot of it come through in metaphor, and we have to interpret it?
That's where the fourth dimension is a lot of fun, because as we start to navigate it better than just being stuck in this is bad and this is good and that's an enemy and that's if you get yourself out of that. And when you start to move into the more subtle levels, you start to move into mythology, because mythology is just a whole fourth dimensional creative dance. And people in indigenous magical cultures are in touch with a lot of those levels because they've learned from experience to keep people from being trapped in between dark and light. You need to start doing ceremony. You need to dance. You need to play. You need to experience a lot of levels on this planet.
The North Pole has been migrating, walking around.
Yeah.
Last I heard it was in Russia and then someplace else, and now they're trying to give it a new spot to be. In fact, it was so intense that is so intense that the pilots can no longer land the big birds using autopilot because there's too much shift in the electromagnetic field.
That's right.
Is this part of the shift, the evolution of the planet as well as the people?
Well, as you know, our planet goes through cycles, and our planet has switched poles periodically. The last time we know for sure is 760,000 years ago. So often people will find out about this stuff and then they'll go into super fear. They'll imagine themselves sitting in the backyard on a garden chair, and then the whole thing just flips. Well, that's not how we experience it. And so right now there's a lot of polar moving, which I think is fascinating. Our planet is such a live, dynamic, bizarre place.
Is all this movement also shifting the ley lines and the sacred locations on the planet?
That's a really hard question to answer, because the only way that we could really know that would be if the planet kind of shifted into, let's say the planet shifted into the same place it was in 8,000 years ago when they built all these incredible megalithic sites, and they built all of those megalithic sites like Stonehenge and the Dolmens and everything. They built those to anchor the higher energetic forces in our reality into this planet. And so those places still have a lot of energy. I love going to sacred sites and feeling the energy there. But I strongly suspect that the energy was probably stronger when they were built. So it's changing all the time.
Well, nothing is consistent but change, is it? Barbara, it's that time of the show when I get to ask you, what's your mission?
Oh, my mission is to open 9 dimensions of consciousness. And I got my reward when I did the research for this book, because I was able to go into some research work in Romania that's been going on that has to do with sacred sites in Romania. And I discovered proof that around 11,000 years ago, people were doing 9-dimensional ceremonies. Now, this came from being able to read some information about a time machine that has been discovered under Romania. And when one of the researchers went back 8,000 or 9,000 in Romania, because he was curious about his country, what he discovered was a bunch of people doing a ceremony. And I read those 2 pages of this man's book. The author is Radu Sinemar. And I read those 2 pages because he was describing a ceremony 8,000 to 9,000 years ago that Gerry and I had been doing for 20 years.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And I understand that ceremony and ritual is an important part of climbing that ladder of dimensionality. Yes. But then there's the appropriation issue. So where do we find these ceremonies that we aren't appropriating native practices, but we're using the same principles?
Yeah. Well, the other thing I did in the books is I had a gradually growing way of describing how to teach it yourself. And in this 20th anniversary edition, plus on my website, all the information that is there about how to teach yourself. The reason that isn't all that difficult is I've discovered evidence that we've been doing this for at least 100,000 years.
So basically we're wired for it.
Yeah, and the Paleolithic era. And so when I was out teaching, I found that people just instantly would fall into this particular routine and ceremonial level because it's something that's deeply ingrained in our consciousness. So my main objective, back to what's my mission, is to do anything I can for people to start teaching this themselves, because it is really fun. And it will awaken you and your neighbors and friends and all that. And all the information on how to do that is either in this book or on my website.
So if we're consciously navigating the dimensions.
Mhm.
Does that change our resonance? And if so, does it provide a quality of resonance that, if we aren't doing it, isn't present for other people?
No, all it does for you individually is it just opens you up to all kinds of levels that you've always sensed were there. You've been reading books for years trying to figure out how to experience or feel this or that. And as you open the dimensions, that information just starts naturally flowing to you. And what it does, it greatly increases synchronicity. And Gerry has done a lot of meditations and teachings on how to different ways to live the dimensions to make it part of your life.
That seems like it's going to be increasingly important as time goes on.
I think so. I think so.
Yeah. So we're about out of time, but can working with dimensions aid human evolution? And if so, how?
Well, assuming that when we are open, when we have open nine-dimensional consciousness, I'm sort of course basing this on the idea that we've been that way until the cataclysms 12,000 years ago. Then what's happening is the natural evolution that should be going on with us is occurring. Our evolution has been very, very distorted by being a multi-traumatized species. And like right now, we're having to go through so much work to try to uncover the truth about some of the abuses that are going on so that we can stop them. There's a lot of work to go through.
It is a lot of work.
Yeah,
Well, Barbara, time always flies when we're talking, but we are out of it. Would you come on our show again? I hope.
I'd love to. Oh,
Oh, it's
sure.
always so much fun to
It's so
work with
much
you.
fun.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks so much for coming on this time.
And thank you for having me.
Our guest this hour has been Barbara Hand Clow, an internationally acclaimed astrologer, ceremonial teacher, and author of fiction and nonfiction. Her website, handclow2012.com. This has been Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit missionevolution.org. And please be sure to join us right here next time. This mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to our rapidly evolving world.